sometimes as though my heart is breaking for us. And so I was looking for inspiration. How do I stay anchored in love? How do I stay anchored in peace? How do I stay anchored in the power to know that I have what is required to change the world, to make the world a better place? And as I was asking infinite wisdom, infinite intelligence for some inspiration to carry me through my tears, I ran across this story. An old rabbi once asked his pupils how they could tell when the night had ended and the day had begun. "Could it be," asked one of the students, "when you can see an animal in the distance and tell whether it is a sheep or a dog?" "No," said the rabbi. Another asked, "Is it when you can look at a tree in the distance and tell whether it is a fig tree or a peach tree?" "No," answered the rabbi. "Then what is it?" the pupils demanded. The rabbi said, "It is when you can look on the face of any woman or man and see that it is your sister or brother. Because if you cannot see this, it is still night." We are in the night. And the way to step into the light, the way to step into day, is to see everyone as our brother and sister. And so our theme this month is in the spirit of harmony. Seeing one another, seeing and knowing the spiritual truth of one another. And then we can harm no one. Yes? I'm going to read today's affirmation, and then I will invite you to join me. Knowing that all life is one life, I lift my heart in harmony with all people and all things. I embrace and cherish myself and everyone, acknowledging our differences and seeking common ground, anchoring in the spiritual truth of love for all. And so it is. Please stand and join me with conviction. Knowing that all life is one life, I lift my heart in harmony with all people and things. I embrace and cherish myself and everyone, acknowledging our differences and seeking common ground, anchoring in the spiritual truth of love for all. And so it is. Please have a seat. In a moment, our guest speaker, Imam Jamal Rahman. Sorry, I messed up your name. I apologize. Jamal Rahman. Of our extended family, isn't he? Jamal is the Imam of the Interfaith Community Sanctuary in Seattle. He is a Sufi leader. He is a powerful presence. He is a friend of this community. In a few moments, he is going to speak with you. I want to let you know that he is also an author and a teacher, and you can learn more about his books and his classes by visiting his table in the atrium. So in a moment, you will hear more from Jamal. I also want to welcome our guest artist today, Matthew Wilson from the Linwood Unity. Unity and Linwood, I'm so grateful to have you here.
My dear friends, what a joy it is to be here. It's always a sacred pilgrimage to come to Unity of Bellevue. You know, my friends, some years ago, I was a spiritual companion to a wonderful lady named Janet. I would go to her and say some wise words, recite Rumi poetry, Hafiz poetry. And one day she held my hands and said, "Jamal, you're a good person. And thank you for all these wonderful things you're saying and doing. But for my healing, I'm dying. I just want you to be present with me." I said, "Please tell me more." She said, "Jamal, if in my presence you feel awkward, feel awkward. Your awkwardness is utterly healing for me. If you're speechless, be speechless. Your speechlessness is utterly healing for me. If you want to cry, cry. Don't hold back. Your crying is so deeply healing for me. In that moment, I think I began to have a fractional taste of what it really means to be present. So, my friends, we have been in a state of confusion, bewilderment, shock over these senseless killings. In just 24 hours plus, close to 30 people have been killed, so many wounded, some more will die, I'm told. Let us do a meditation rather than talk, where we really honor and are present with our feelings. Feelings are just energies begging, in the words of Carl Jung, to be kissed. Carl Jung, who studied many Eastern traditions, said, will you once in your life have the grace and courage to kiss the demons and dragons within you? That's how they turn into a prince or princess. So please close your eyes. And for a few moments, focus on your nostril and just be present with your breath as you inhale and as you exhale. And as you are in silence, I'll request you please, as you think about the events of the last 24 hours, get in touch with any feelings that come up. Sadness, grief, anger, bitterness, hate. It's okay. These are just words. They're nothing but energy begging to be acknowledged, touched, and kissed. Feel them. Give yourself permission to experience, to be present with those feelings. And then begin to ask yourself, where do I feel these sensations that I call sadness, anger, grief, bitterness, whatever it is? Each feeling has a physical sensation in a part of the body. Where is it? Locate it, please. Where are you feeling these sensations? And if you're able to locate them, just receive them with your consciousness, embracing and holding them as you would hold loved ones, but always with mercy and compassion for yourself. And just be present with those sensations. That's all. No need to fix it, analyze it, but a great need to be present with it. If the sensation moves, move with it, but gently and fully be present with it, with mercy, with compassion for yourself. the Sufi tradition, as you're present with this physical sensation, the feeling, ask it a question. Do you have a message for me? Are you trying to tell me something? Do you have a secret for me? What is important is that you ask the question, that's all. The next question, how may I love you? How may I befriend you? Again, what is critical is you respectfully, lovingly, humbly ask that question. How may I love you? How may I befriend you? Because it is begging to be touched, acknowledged, loved, and integrated. And lastly, as you focus on that physical sensation in the body, make an intention to breathe in and out through this physical holding. Inhale and exhale through this part of you. Allow the divine breath to caress you there as you breathe in and as you breathe out. And gently join me in a healing chant, sound vibration from the Sufi tradition, H-U, Hu. Hu. Keep on going. Hu. Keep on going, I'll do a Quranic healing recitation. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم الصراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. Thank you, my friends. At your convenience, open your eyes. So, my dear friends, I want to focus on this wonderful insight by Hans Kung. Anybody know Hans Kung? A very wonderful Swiss theologian, Christian theologian, very well known. He's saying, if you want peace among nations, you must have peace between religions. And if you want peace between religions, dialogue between religions. Gandhi would say, it's not enough to say, I'm open-minded. Because you would ask, what are you open-minded about? So, as you know, I'm 1/3 of the Interfaith Amigos. I work with Rabbi Ted Falcon and Pastor Don McKenzie. I'm also Imam at the Interfaith Community Sanctuary, and we've been together ever since my hair was black, I always say. just after 9/11. And We've toured the country. We had about 250 presentations. And we've always explored, what does it mean to have interfaith dialogue? And together we've written 3 books. And we realize from our own experience and also by studying history that really there are about 5 or 6 stages of interfaith dialogue. The first stage, probably the most important one, is, for me as a Muslim, as the Quran says, can you come to know the other on a human level? Whether it's religious difference, political difference, racial difference, cultural difference, the key is friendship. I'm talking about a heart-to-heart connection. You see, there are a lot of interfaith programs all over the country, but only occasionally. Christmas time, Ramadan time, High Holy Days time, Buddhist celebration, only during those times, Hindu celebration. The complaint is that at those times, because they're so infrequent, the conversation is, quote unquote, absurdly nice. Once it's over, they go home, Muslims become terrorists, Jews become occupiers, and Christians become liars. Unless somehow some people have taken the opportunity to become friends, connected. Because if you become friends, whether it's a Trump supporter or Hillary supporter, if you become friends, a heart-to-heart human connection, it's no longer possible to demonize the other. Plus, it has been seen actually in real life experience that somehow it creates the spaciousness where we can collaborate together, no matter how big our differences, in projects that are dear to both of our hearts. Social justice issues, earth care. That's why, you know, in Central Asia, there's a wonderful saying, can you practice 3 cups of tea? Can you share 3 cups of tea? Listen, respect, connect. Can I really listen? Because I'm not listening. As you're talking, I'm formulating my answer. So Rumi says listening is actually metaphorically like putting your head on the person's chest and sinking into the answer. Respect. I might be against that person's behavior. I might hate that behavior. It might be evil. But I cannot be against that person's essence. Sacred being, Christ nature, Buddha nature, Elohim nature, Allah nature, Krishna nature. A very wonderful mystic, Kabir, 17th, 18th century from India, he says, in dealing with someone who's adversarial, he said, do what is right. Don't allow yourself to be abused. Protect yourself. But as you take the right action, I beg you, I beg you, I beg you, do not keep this person's essence out of your heart. And just keeping this discernment in your heart and mind has the power to shift heaven and earth. So just be with that. As I look at my clock and make sure I don't go over my time. Okay, thank you. I always joke and say, very difficult to tell that to an Easterner because, as you've heard me say many times, in the East, we talk and talk and talk and talk till somebody starts to snore. Then we know it's time to stop. But I have the technology of the clock here. Okay. By the way, I wanted to tell you, having relationships is critical for happiness. Have you heard of that wonderful, the longest Harvard study, I think it's over 85 or 84 years, about what constitutes happiness. Is it money? Is it titles? Is it social status? Is it diet? Is it good health? Number 1 was, they'll know you are happy if you have solid relationships. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can be difficult, but it's reliable relationship. They can even predict your longevity of life based on that. There's another study, a 7-year study from Brigham Young University, I guess in Utah. They discovered the same thing. What contributes mostly to happiness and longevity is your relationship. But what was shocking was number 2 was not diet, was not this, was not that. It was what they call social interaction. Meaning, how do you treat the clerk at the post office? Do you talk to them? At the grocery store, the teller in the bank? If you're conversing, if you're really having a heartfelt conversation, just casually, you'll be happy in life. You'll live a long life. So just be with that. Okay, so number 2 was, if I really want to have a dialogue, interfaith dialogue, I must know something about that other person's tradition. I repeat, as Gandhi said, it's not enough to say, I am non-prejudiced. That's a way of avoiding the real work. So I'm a Muslim. I live in America. I'm a US citizen. It is my sacred duty, as Gandhi said. It is the sacred duty of every individual to have an appreciative understanding of the other person's religion. Mind those words, sacred duty and appreciative understanding. I must have an appreciative understanding of Christianity, of Judaism. Buddhism is growing very fast, of Buddhism, of Hinduism. I don't have to know the details. But it is my sacred duty, if I really want peace in a multi-religious society, to have an appreciative understanding of the other person's religion. So how much do you really know about Islam? So if I ask you, when I say Islam, what century are we talking about? Is it before Christ or after Christ? After Christ. What century, do you know? 6th or 7th century. I also want you to know there are 2 main denominations in Islam, like in Christianity, Catholics and Protestants. Do you know what they are in Islam? Shia and Sunni. 85% of the world's Muslims are Sunni, 15% are Shia. So what caused this bifurcation? As it always happens, it's sometimes silly. It's based on a historical dispute when Prophet Muhammad died in 632 CE. Who would succeed him as a community leader? Islam was just embryonic, small, it was growing. One group said, well, it's natural, it should be by democratic consensus. Another group said, of course, that's beautiful, but don't forget, we've had a prophet in our midst. It should be by blood lineage. The ones who said blood lineage, who are they? You could be 50% right. That's Shia. The ones who said democratic consensus, that's Sunni. Today it doesn't matter because, there are over 55 majority Muslim countries, but just that historical dispute over the choice of a community leader has caused that separation. Although Sunni and Shia are very close in their theology. You know that wonderful joke you've heard again in all the Abrahamic tradition. God comes down and reveals certain basic truths to some people, but then the devil comes along and says, let me organize that for you. And that becomes religion. Okay. I also want you to know, as for example, Professor Bernard Lewis, who just passed away not long ago, a very famous professor at Princeton, said, we must tell students in our schools that Islam at one time for 1,000 years was a privileged religion, just as Christianity today is a privileged religion. And how do you determine that? For those thousands of years, who had the largest geographical empire? The Muslim Empire. The strongest economic power? Muslim Empire. the largest military machine, Muslim empire. And what Muslims like to believe, a beautiful flowering of art, civilization, sciences, mystical sciences. But today, if you ask, in which part of the world are people the poorest of the poor? Muslim world. The most illiterate of the illiterate? Muslim world. The largest number, by a huge margin, of war refugees? Muslim world. What happened? Well, when you are number one, and you really feel you are number one, it seems through the study of history that the leaders become arrogant and ignorant. And that causes a steep decline. That's why I love that saying, we learn from history that we do not learn from history. So what else about Islam do I want you to know? I really want you to know there is so much spirituality in Islam. People think Sufism is a denomination in Islam. It is not. It is a heartfelt aspiration to live the spirit of the tradition. Rumi, you've heard of Rumi, was actually a Sunni. His name is not actually Rumi. His name is Muhammad Jalaluddin. But he spent most of his life in a place called Rum, so it's called Rumi. But he's one of the greatest Islamic theologians. He knew the Quran upside down. All of his poetry is about the inner teachings of the Quran. How many of you know Hafiz? Beautiful. You know Hafiz? Hafiz is not his name. His name is Khwaja Muhammad Shamsuddin. What does Hafiz mean? Anybody know? Someone who has memorized the Quran from beginning to end. So all of his poetry is really also teachings about the inner meanings of the Quran. And one last thing about Islam I want you to know, there is so much humor in Islam, both in poetry and in stories. You know, I just came back from Chautauqua Institution in New York. And there we were talking about C.S. Lewis, who said, many of us want to serve God, but mostly in an advisory capacity. So here's a wonderful story of the mullah through whom many truths are conveyed. He's lying very comfortably underneath the large mulberry tree, wondering, how can I be of service to God, to God? And suddenly something splashes in his heart. He says, God, excuse me, wow, I'm looking out there. I see these tiny, flimsy creepers with huge watermelons on the ground. And here is this huge mulberry tree with the tiniest of berries. God, something is not right in your cosmic design, in your feng shui of your cosmic design. And God, thank you so much that I could be of service to you. There's room for improvement for all of us. And just at that time, a tiny berry separates from the branch. And is graced by another insight. What if that had been a watermelon? Let me see how I can be of service in another way to you, God. Our slavish dependence on pundits, experts, authorities. The Prophet warned us again and again, yes, listen to experts, listen to authorities, but he always said, consult your heart, consult your heart, consult your heart. The mullah is gravely ill, some say on his deathbed. His wife is wailing, lamenting, crying, and now comes in that expert, the allopathic doctor. Examines the mullah at length and turns to her husband and says, to the wife actually, and says, oh, honorable wife of the mullah, the Quran says only Allah is immortal. Your husband's soul has flown to the bosom of God. He is dead, but the mullah is not dead. He's feebly, very quietly saying, I'm alive, I'm alive, I'm alive. What does the wife say? Quiet, don't argue with the doctor. Another story which is relevant for our times. The mullah is giving a large party. He needs a huge pot. He doesn't have one. He goes to a neighbor, and the housewife has a large pot. She's reluctant to give, but the rules of hospitality demand it. So she gives the pot. But the mullah comes back the next day with 2 pots. She's saying, what are these other pots? She said, didn't you know, madam? Your pot was pregnant. It gave birth to this little pot. She says, I kind of thought so. Thank you so much for taking care of the delivery. Next month, the mullah comes to borrow the pot again. This time, she's so happy to give the pot. But the next day, next week, next month, no news of the mullah. The housewife goes to the mullah's door. Where's my pot? She says, madam, didn't you know? Your pot was pregnant, and alas, it died in childbirth. And the housewife says, that's absurd. How can a pot be pregnant? He says, you believed it the first time. What is this about? To discern between truth and truth of convenience. Okay, I better stop there. I'm watching the time. So number 3 is, can you really become aware that every single holy book has 2 kinds of verses? Particular verses and universal verses. Particular verses are in desperate need of historical context, textual context. Universal verses are timeless, placeless, filled with wisdom. By the way, people say, what can you do with particular verses? You can't use whiteout. You can't engage in what is called holy amnesia. But you have to become aware it needs historical and textual context. The problem becomes if you take a particular verse and advocate that as a universal verse. The problem becomes, as is happening today, you take a particular verse from the Quran and compare that to a universal verse from the Christian scriptures. That causes a lot of misunderstanding. Okay, the 4th one is to become aware. As you start to connect, as you are inclined to become friends, you're willing to be vulnerable, that you are able now, stage 4 says, to enter into more difficult conversations. Can we begin to talk about that which is difficult, not in your tradition, what is awkward, not in your tradition, in my own tradition? And be honest about it. Have the moral courage, the honesty to talk, express, not with a view to just criticize and just tear it apart, with a view to interpret in a way that serves the common good. For example, wherever we have gone, these questions have been asked of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the 3 of us that we stand there, from young people, older people, elders actually. Why is there that there is so much of exclusivity in each of your traditions? So much of violence in your traditions. So much of unequal status of women in each of the traditions. So much of homophobia in your traditions. Can we be honest and talk about it? You see, Rumi already had this in his heart and mind. He said, a bee and a wasp, they drink from the same flower. A bee and a wasp, they drink from the same flower. One produces nectar, other one produces a sting. So your understanding of a verse depends on 2 things: your intention and your level of consciousness. Okay, 5th one, very quickly. If we have done this 4 stages, the 5th stage is you become aware that all religions are paths to a shared universal. I'm a Muslim. I'm grounded in Islam. But as I'm open to the beauty and wisdom of other traditions, this waters my Islamic roots. I become a better Muslim and a more developed, complete human being, which is why we say interfaith is not about conversion. Interfaith is not about conversion. It's about completion, becoming a more complete, developed human being. The last one is, no matter what we say, no matter how much activities I'm involved in, it is critical that we do what is called the inner work. Practices to become more expanding of our awareness, more connected to compassion within and without. Very quickly, I want to tell you, I was in a panel. This African American professor was saying every 28 hours, an African American is being killed by state-sponsored violence. Every 28 hours. But he said that's not the real problem. The real problem is the African American is being killed a billion with a B, billion times a day, by the biased thoughts we have about them. Prejudices, stereotyping. They're this, they're this. That is the real problem. And how do we overcome that? Sure, education, legislation, but the real work is spiritual practices. Then I love this scientist in the White House who said, for 30 years I thought the biggest environmental problems were loss of biodiversity, climate change, ecosystem collapse, and with wonderful good science we could overcome all of those. He said, now I've realized the biggest environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And how do we overcome that unless we do spiritual practices? So I just want to end with two insights. One is about religion, both of them. We talk about religion, we debate about religion, we fight about religion, we kill for religion, we do everything but what? Live it. Let's take that to heart. The other insight is from the Sufi sages who say, Jamal, if your relationship with your holy book or your religion comes in the way of your relationship with the other, it will definitely come in the way of your relationship with God. Thank you, my friends.